Hi, it's Maija here with my wrap-up of the first 5 books that I've read in 2018. I decided to try out this new method of doing wrap-ups only about 5 books at a time, because I had really a hard time doing the monthly hauls. It really put a lot of pressure on me, because I would talk about all the books I read in a month. First I had to write down my thoughts of all the books, and then I needed to edit that video, and that was the hard part, since I ended up talking about the books for about 30 minutes at a time, and then I had to edit it down to a 10-minute video or something like that people would actually watch. So I decided to try out this method of only about 5 books, so that the videos would not end up being that long. I realized that now I am only doing the wrap-up of the first 5 books that I've read in 2018, and I have read about 20 to 25 so far, so I really need to get going with these wrap-ups. But now we're gonna talk about the first 5, and that is like the first half of January. So in this one I'm gonna talk about 2 novels, 1 novella and 2 comic volumes, and I will put timestamps as always in the description below, so you can skip to the reviews that you care about if you don't want to watch the whole video. The books that I read during the first half of January were quite mediocre. I mean, I liked them, a lot of them, when I read them, but they weren't anything special, or they didn't stick with me, and they didn't stand out. And I've already talked about the first 2 books of these in a Friday Reads video, but I'm going to talk about them again in the spirit of doing a wrap-up. The first book that I finished in 2018 was Provenance by Ann Leckie. This is a novel set in the same universe as her Imperial Raj books, but not set in Raj's space, so in different part of the galaxy. And this is a one-shot adventure with a lighter feel. It tells about Ingray, who wants to gain her mother's acceptance by freeing this prisoner who might know the whereabouts of some priceless relics. Her mother hasn't yet named her successor, so Ingray, who is adopted, wants to better her standing against her brother by bringing her this prisoner. The reason I picked Provenance up was because I enjoyed Ann Leckie's other work so much, and I wanted to learn about a different part of the same universe, and also the premise of the main character going around with this escaped prisoner really felt interesting. The problem that I had with this book was that I never really connected with the main character, Ingray. When I was reading the ancillary justice books, I was totally in Breck's corner. I was really rooting for Breck. That didn't really happen with me for Ingray. Ingray did have a lot of character moments in the book, but I just wasn't captivated by her. But I did enjoy the moments that she had and the relationship that she had with her brother, since it was such a fraught relationship. It was really intriguing to follow and see how they reacted to one another. What I really did like were the aliens. So we are introduced to the Gek and the Gek ambassador in this one. I love the Gek ambassador. And there's also this nice theme of family and belonging and traditions, and about finding your own corner of the universe despite what your family might expect of you. So this theme was pretty present in pretty much all of the characters and their side stories, and I did end up being more interested in the side characters than I was in the main character. I gave this one 3.5 stars. It was a fun story, but like I said, I wasn't captivated by the main character, and I also thought that the plot shifted gears a bit too many times, and I would have liked it to focus more on some parts of it. Next I read The Long Day in Lychford by Paul Cornell, which is the 3rd one in his The Witches of Lychford novellas. This novella series tells about these 3 witches in this small English town of Lychford. And the first one focused on Judith, who's this older witch, and the second one on Lizzie, who is the vicar of the town and also a witch, and this 3rd one focuses on Autumn, who is the owner of the magic shop and about the only person of color in Lychford. That last bit is important because Brexit has just happened and Autumn is understandably pissed off. The plot itself focuses on time and space acting up as the borders of Lychford receive a hit. I really like the first novella, The Witches of Lychford, and then I like the second one a bit less, and then I like this one again a bit less. My main beef is that this focuses on Autumn, but I still don't feel like I know more about her than I did before this novella. I thought the focus on her would give me more of an insight into her character, but it didn't do that, at least for me. I also thought that some of the plot developments didn't quite send out the message that they were perhaps trying to send about Brexit and stuff. So some of the ways that the theme was handled at times grated on me, and there's also this little nitpick that I have to mention. It's really a small thing. So this broke my suspension of disbelief. There's this moment when Autumn meets this lorry driver who is Polish but works in England as a lorry driver, and it says that it took a bit of miming and explaining to translate the word radio to him, because she wanted him to test the radio in his lorry. First, he spoke a little English. So you'd think that things that have to do with the lorry, he would know the vocabulary for that. And the other thing is that the Polish word for radio is radio. So I don't think that would take a lot of explaining to get across. Anyway, that was a nitpick. I gave this one 3 stars, maybe even leaning towards the lower end, like 2.5 stars. But this did set up very clearly in the ending the next novella, so I'm interested to see what happens in the next one. Then I finished The Strange Practice by Vivian Shaw, which is the first in the Dr. Greta Helsing series, which is this sort of gothic-y urban fantasy series set in modern-day London. And Dr. Greta Helsing is a doctor to the undead. This starts a new series, and in this one there's this new supernatural threat emerging that targets the undead of London and their helpers, so that means Greta and her patients, whom she feels responsible for. I picked this one up because I like the premise of a doctor to the undead who is also named Helsing, and I like how in this book we have characters from old vampire stories like Lord Ruthven and Varney the Vampire, who just happen to be classic vampires whose stories I hadn't read when I read this book, but there are also ghouls and demons and other sorts of supernatural creatures. So the premise sounded great, but the execution was a bit uneven. This is a debut novel. I thought this would focus more on Greta, but it was in all honesty more of an ensemble novel. There were quite a few POV characters, and there was also quite a few moments when I have to admit that I was quite bored. The writing also was a bit uneven. There were times when it was more matter of fact, and there were times when it was more lavish. There was also a lot of tea and coffee drinking in this book. Like, I don't mind that usually. It can make a book feel cozy, but in this one it was like in every chapter, or 2 times in a chapter, when someone was making tea, going through the actions of making tea or coffee, or recommending to someone they should have some tea or coffee. I guess it was something for the characters to do while they spoke, but it got to be a bit too much. Now again, a little nitpick, and that is that when Greta took someone's temperature, it was stated in Fahrenheit, which is really weird since this is set in London, and the publishing house that published this is a UK publishing house. The author herself, I think, lived in the UK until she was 7, and then she moved with her family to the US. So I realized that she might be using Fahrenheit in her daily life, but I was wondering why it wasn't converted in editing. It was a bit annoying because then I had to convert it even though I wouldn't have had to, since it took place in London. What I really enjoyed when reading this book were the old-timey references that were used to describe the characters. For example, Lord Ruthven was described as a silent movie star, and Varney was described as an old Puritan, and there was another character whose looks were described as an old TV announcer. So I thought these ways to describe the characters brought a nice feel of its own, a unique feel to the book. I won't be continuing on with the series though, since it was quite boring at times, even though I did really like the inclusion of vampire characters. This did finally give me the push to go and read The Vampire by John Polidori, more of which in another wrap-up video. I did give this one 3 stars at the end. So now we're gonna move on to the comics. The first comic that I read was Misfit City by Kirsten Smith, Kurt Lustgarten, Naomi Franquise, and Brittany Peer. This is an adventure comic about a group of teenage girls who stumble upon this ancient pirate treasure map, and it has heavy Goonies influences. So it is set in Cannon Cove, a small town whose only claim to fame is that this 80s movie called The Gloomies was filmed there. I was interested in this aged-up, female-led take on the Goonies, and I picked this one up when it was on sale on Comixology, and I really enjoyed the art style, but in the end the comic itself just wasn't for me. I didn't think we found out enough about the girls, got to know them enough, and also I just think that I need a bit more fantasy elements in my adventure stories. So there were some supernatural elements in this one, as is fitting for a sort of pirate map adventure, but I just want more fantasy, basically. This is what the art looks like. There's a bit of a glare, but maybe you can see something. Anyway, I gave this one 3 stars. I really like the art, like I said, but I won't be continuing on. But if the premise sounds like something that you would enjoy, please do check this one out. And the final thing from this wrap-up is Princess Jellyfish 2-in-1 Omnibus Volume 5 by Akiko Higashimura, and this continues the story of Tsukimi, who, along with her geek friends and this fashionista boy, are trying to save the house that the geek girls all live in by starting a fashion brand. So this volume focuses heavily on the relationship of Tsukimi and Shu, who is the older brother of Kuranosuke, who is the fashionista boy that I just mentioned. And I was here for it. I love Shu. I'm not gonna hide it. Shu is like my favorite character in these comics. Shu and Tsukimi are just so clumsy when it comes to dating, and this was just too precious. Also, the chauffeur character of Shu's and Kuranosuke's family, Hanamori, is really hilarious in this one. He is often used as a comic relief character, but I laughed out loud multiple times at his antics in this one. Sadly, I get the feeling that Shu and Tsukimi are just portrayed as way too clumsy to actually have a chance of ending up together. So I'm just gonna enjoy it while I can. I gave this one 5 stars. So those were the first 5 books that I read in 2018. The reason why I showed you them on my tablet was because they were all from the library, or then they were ebooks, so I don't have any physical copies to show you. But let me know in the comments if you have read any of these books, and I will see you in my next video.